Hi, my name is Betty Covington. I am a distinguished Toastmaster. I have my master's degree in business and leadership from Grand Canyon University. And today we're going to be talking about listening skills. My passion in life has always been about adult education. I have been a trainer at every job I've ever had. And I'm passionate about seeing those light bulbs go off when people learn something new. But one of the things that I've noticed is that as adults, we've kind of lost one of the critical skills in learning, which is good listening skills. Back in the 1990s, I self-published a book called I Hear You, but I'm Not Listening. And today I am going to share with you some of the things that I learned when I started the whole process of writing this book. So first of all, okay, should be able to see, I hear you, but I'm not listening now. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between listening and hearing. When I tell people that I'm getting ready to do a presentation on listening, they say, huh? Like they're not listening, but really that they're not hearing. There's a famous Toastmasters clicker. If I click on this, you hear it. Unless you're hearing impaired, you can't stop hearing this sound. Hearing is physiological. It's something that your body does. If there are sirens going off in the background, if there's loud music playing, if your neighbors are arguing, you're going to hear them. But listening, on the other hand, something in which you are fully engaged, something that you choose to do physiologically. So we're going to talk today about the physiological aspects of actually engaging your brain, making a decision to listen. When is listening very important? Is listening ever not important? Well, sure, listening sometimes isn't necessary. I'll give you a couple of obvious examples. You've got a game show playing on television. Trust me, it's not important enough for you to be highly focused and engaged in listening. Your child comes in and they're holding their arm like this. You better listen. That looks serious. Or your boss is hovering over your desk at work. Again, time to engage fully listening. Sometimes it's easy to get distracted when we're listening. And because it's easy to get distracted, it's really a good idea to practice. And the easiest way to do this is on your family and friends, even though it may not be 100% necessary to be fully engaged in conversation. Try practicing. All of a sudden, they're going to find you're very interested because you've become a good listener. But you have to actually make a decision that you want to be engaged. You want to be a good listener. Distractions are one of the major interrupters or the major detractors from good listening. So what are some things that are distractions? Well, I mentioned the game show on TV a little bit ago. If your teenager comes in and wants to talk to you about their plans for the weekend, it might be a good idea to just turn the TV off because you want to know what your kids are doing on the weekend. If you've got your email open up on your computer and your boss comes up to your desk, you may want to put down your email and turn and focus to your boss, because email and cell phones are definitely distractions at work. But there can be some other things that are less audible. Let's say, for example, that you have a very cluttered desk. You have lots of pieces of paper all over your desk. If you have a lot of papers on your desk and you're trying to focus on just this little piece in the center, they can be screaming at you in the background and causing you to be distracted. If you have a task at home that you really need to get cleared up, say, for example, that you know that Johnny has a soccer game tomorrow and you haven't washed his soccer uniform, and your neighbor Kate comes walking over with a platter of cookies and wants to sit down and chat. I'm going to tell you right now that doing that laundry and getting Johnny's uniform clean is going to be a distraction to anything that Kate might have to say. Did you know that lighting can also be a distraction? If you're in a darkened room, it may be harder to focus because you're spending more time straining your eyes on trying to read or see what's going on. So there's lots of things that can actually be a distraction. If it's important for you to really listen to something, you may want to choose to get rid of those distractions. Clear your desk, turn off the extraneous noise in the background, make sure you have good lighting. Those are all things that can help you. When we talk about listening, we're really talking about closing the communication circle. We've all heard it before. You speak, you receive, you comprehend, you give feedback, you close the communication gap. What does that really mean? So speaking and receiving, first of all, you have a speaker and a receiver. If you're the listener, you're the receiver. But being fully engaged in listening means that you're leaning forward, you're nodding your head, you're giving verbal feedback. You're asking questions. I'm sorry, what did that mean? Or did you say that again? And then you're asking for clarification. You just used the word gobbledygook, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. Trust me, I do that a lot when I'm talking to the IT guys at work. I just don't know what all the IT words are anymore. Once you've gotten all the language barriers set aside, you've asked your clarifying questions, then it's always a good idea to summarize and say, this is what I heard, am I correct? This is what you want to do, this is what you're proposing, whatever. That's the communication cycle we're talking about. But when you don't have the full circle, what are some of the things that could cause a problem in closing the whole communication cycle? What I'd like you to do now is to just take a piece of paper, any piece of paper, it doesn't really matter, and then we're going to do an exercise. First thing I'd like you to do is draw a circle about 3 inches. Now I'm doing this at the same time that you are. And then inside the circle, I want you to draw an arc at the top and the bottom of the circle. And then I want you to put some chevrons on the arc. It's harder when you can't give feedback, but this is what I just drew. Or if you can't see that very well, how about this? Did you draw a baseball? Because that's what I was trying to get you to do. It's hard, isn't it, when you can't ask clarifying questions? How'd you do? Another thing that can really get us challenged when we have communication barriers is our own personal filters. I'm going to tell you a story. Years ago, when my husband and I were first dating, and we've been married 42 years now, so we've been married a long time. But when we were first dating, he and I were having a discussion about police officers, and I had formerly been married to a police officer, so I knew quite a few police officers. And he started to tell me stories about how police officers were aggressive and angry. And that wasn't the experience I had had at all. And I told him that. So I told him that the only reason he felt that way was because he was ignorant. Okay. I've already told you I have my master's degree, obviously college educated. I had great schooling as I was growing up. My husband, on the other hand, spent his first 8 years of school in a 2-room schoolhouse. What he heard, or excuse me, what I said when I told him he was ignorant is the textbook definition. He was uninformed. He was uneducated about a particular subject. What he heard was that you're stupid and you don't know anything. Whoa, that wasn't my intention at all. But that's what the communication gap did to harm us. So let's do another exercise now. Take that same piece of paper that you drew your baseball on, fold it in half, and tear off the lower right-hand corner. Fold it in half again and tear off the lower left-hand corner. Fold it in half one more time and tear off the upper and lower right-hand corner. And I did that. This is the picture I got. Now, some of you, depending upon how you folded it or how you turned the paper as you were folding it, depending upon your personal filters of being left-handed or right-handed, may have gotten one hole, or you may have just gotten scalloped edges around the edges and no holes at all. That's what happens when you're applying your own personal filters. So one thing I learned about personal filters is, number one, I never have ever called anybody ignorant again, because that could be a red flag word. But also try to be aware of who your audience is. Try to be aware of any barriers that you may have to communication because of ethnic or educational or locational differences. Even language barriers may cause a problem when you're trying to have a communication situation. Emotional filters are a little bit different than education and locational filters, because emotional filters are very personal. We're going to do another exercise now, and I'm going to give you 2 emotional and 1 non-emotional filter and have you think about them. You can see the 3 words here. The first one is mother. I want you to think about what I mean when I say the word mother. Do you think about the Madonna with Christ? You think about Mona Lisa? Do you think about babies? What do you think about this? That's my mom. I love my mom, and she was absolutely one of the best things that ever happened. So I have a very emotional reaction when I think about mother. Let's talk about another one that you may have an emotional or fearful response to, and that's the word dog. When I think about the word dog, what do you picture in your mind? And if you're a cat person, it's okay to substitute the word cat here if you want to picture cat instead of dog. I don't exactly understand it myself, but others will. When you think about dog, if you had a bad experience as a child with an angry or vicious dog, you may have a different emotional response than the one I have. Here's my response when I think of the word dog. This top one is a picture of Roscoe, my terrier, when he's getting laser therapy. The bottom one is a picture of Foster, who was just a sweet little boy. He died when he was 15 years old, had a good life. And of course, you probably recognize the middle one. I'm sure she's famous by now. That's my little princess, Gabby. She's here with me right now. I would never hold a meeting without her. But let's talk about maybe some non-emotional filters that you may have too. Things that are just totally neutral, but maybe a barrier to communication because you don't share the same meaning to the word. The word is blue. I happen to be recording this message on the 4th of July. So to me, red, white, and blue, I'm thinking about navy blue right now with big white stars on it. But maybe you've chosen to take this meeting outside and you're looking up at a beautiful blue sky. Or maybe you recently had a child and you're thinking about the blue walls in the nursery. There can be all different kinds of connotations to the word blue. Maybe you have blue in your company logo and that's what you're seeing. There are so many different shades of blue that we can have all different connotations to that. By the same thing, words like deadline. If you work in, say the publishing business, to you, a deadline may be 6 months or a year because you're waiting for an author to get something done. If you are working in a factory, deadline may be how many widgets you can produce in the next 5 minutes. If you're in the delivery service like Amazon or UPS or FedEx, deadline may be 24 hours or 48 hours. The word deadline can be different things depending upon what the business is that you're in. Excuse me. So how does what you see impact what you hear? Because visual cues can also be a distraction against communication and listening. Let's give you a scenario. You and your spouse have decided to attend a business conference together and you have a business conference dinner tonight, but it happens to be in Orlando. So you brought the kids and you're going to go to theme parks after the conference is over. But you can't leave the kids alone in the hotel room tonight. So you call down to the concierge and you ask if they have a babysitting service. And they say, yes, we have a great babysitting service. All of our babysitters are experienced, they're all licensed, they're all bonded. And so you're feeling good about leaving your children with the hotel babysitter. You hear the knock on the door, and here's the person on the other side. You heard the hotel concierge tell you that they're all licensed and bonded, all experienced. Are you comfortable leaving your 3 and 5-year-old with this gentleman at the door? You may or may not be, depending on how you feel about facial tattoos. Let's do another one. You're hiring for your company receptionist. This is actually a true story. I was interviewing for a receptionist for my office one time. It wasn't this young lady, but it was a similar young lady who had a tongue piercing. And the entire time of the interview, she was clicking her piercing against her teeth. All I could hear was her tongue waving at me. I have no idea what any of the answers were to my questions because all I could see was the tongue. Needless to say, she didn't get the job. And she may have been a great qualified applicant. Her resume looked okay, but I couldn't hear what she said because of the visual distraction that I was receiving. Sometimes we make decisions about people that are just visual cues, and they may never even get a chance to have the conversation because we've already made a decision about them. When you look at this gentleman, do you see homeless? Do you see old? Do you see a retired professor? Do you see a grandfather? Do you see someone who's asking you for money? Do you see someone who's trying to write you out of his will? Sometimes we make visual decisions before we ever get to what we hear. So you always want to try to eliminate hasty judgments no matter what. Another barrier to communication cycle to really good listening is listening to respond rather than listening to understand. When I was a little girl, my family lived in a rural suburb of the Seattle area on a kind of a hilly area. We had paved roads, but gravel sidewalks. And Jimmy Oldham, my next door neighbor, stole my bicycle. And he was riding up and down the hill, and I was chasing him, trying to catch him and get my bicycle back. And I fell down on the gravel and I cut my knee really bad. And I ran home and I was crying, and my mom had to get the gravel out of my knee, and then she took me to the hospital and I got stitches. Okay. Do you really care about what happened to me as a kid? No. But let's talk about what was going on while I was telling you that story. People speak at a rate of about 200 to 300 words per minute, depending upon what part of the country they're from. And we have the ability to listen at about 700 to 900 words per minute. So we have all that unused brain capacity when somebody's telling you the story. So you're listening to the story and you're thinking about the time that you were terrorized by a bully when you were a child. You're thinking about your childhood bike. You're thinking about your adult bike. You're thinking about the time that you got cut really bad and had to go and get stitches. All of these things are going on with that unused capacity in your mind. So here's where you have to make a decision to, first of all, not interrupt with your one-upped better story than mine, but make a decision to focus on why Betty is telling you that story at this time. Why is it important? And your story really isn't important in this case. Maybe sometimes it is if you're maybe on a first date and you're trying to build rapport and get to know somebody, your story may become important. But if you're talking to your family, if you're talking to people at work, your story just shouldn't come into play at all. Instead, what you may want to do is try to distract yourself from all that unused brain power and really focus. If you're at home, really, turn off all the distractors in the background, lean forward and try to get eye contact with your spouse or your child and your significant other. Make sure that you're really focused at home. At work or in a business situation, you'd say, as we're talking today, I'm just going to write down a few notes so I don't forget what we're talking about, and gain their permission to take notes so that they don't think that you're doodling or drawing flowers. Someone comes to you with a proposal at work, and you're using that unused brain capacity in the background. Here's what might be happening. They say, I'd like to try this, and you're arguing mentally, we did this 8 years ago, it didn't work. You're so focused on what happened 8 years ago that you miss the second point to their argument, which is not something you tried 8 years ago, which might have changed the entire outcome if you had only tried it with that second point. So trying again to focus, if you're making notes, they say, I want to try to build a widget this way, you're writing down 8 years ago. And then they give you the second point, which is robotics. And now you're listening in an entirely different way. You may have questions about how much the robotics might cost, or what the installation or lag time might be. So you have questions. You can make little notes down as you're talking, as they're talking, so that you can get to it. Finally, at the very end, you may still think time and money, or it's not the right time to try this. You may disagree. But before you instantly jump to disagreement, you want to go all the way back on those communication cycle tools and ask questions, ask clarifying questions. How much would it cost us to implement? How much would it impact our productivity if we implement this idea? What kind of time frame would it take to get this implemented? What kind of education for our staff would it mean? Would it mean changing to our staffing? Ask all those clarifying questions. And then, if you still disagree, have an open discussion about why you disagree, and maybe send them back to do some more homework on the idea. You don't want to slam a door shut until you've had the opportunity to examine it from both sides all the way through. This kind of open communication is what's going to make your employees feel valued and make your family feel valued when you have these more thorough discussions before you just slam the door shut. One final exercise I'd like to do is for you to consider, what are the traits of someone that you know is a good listener? Take just a minute, just grab a scratch paper and jot down some of the ways that they're a good listener. Okay, I jotted down a couple of my own. One of the things we talked about is not interrupting when you're speaking. If you know a good listener, you know that they always let you get your whole thought out. The second thing is maybe leaning forward and showing that you're engaged and really focused on what they have to say. Maybe nodding their head to show that they're listening. Asking clarifying questions. Now, I want you to think again about that person that you know that's a good listener. How much time do they spend talking? You know that old 80-20 rule? Most good listeners only speak about 20% of the time and let the other person talk about 80% of the time. Are you a good listener? In closing the communication process, you always want to make sure that you're restating everything that you heard and the agreements. Your teenager wants to go out with somebody new. Okay, here's what I heard you say. You're going to go to the movies. There's going to be at least 3 other teenagers involved in going to the movies. Jimmy's mom is actually going to drive you to the movies and pick you up afterwards. You're not going in one of the other kids' cars. You've saved up enough allowance that you can afford to go to the movies. Do I have all that correct? And you agree to be home by 10 o'clock? Okay, you can go to the movies. That's how it would work at home. At work, it might be something like, I know that you've been struggling to meet your production quotas. We've agreed that you're going to track your production throughout the day. And at the end of each day, you're going to send me an email and tell me how many widgets you produced. We're going to meet weekly and talk about your production, and I'm going to be observing you and seeing if I can find ways for you to tweak the way that you produce things to make it work better. Is that what you and I both agree upon? Those types of recapping and restating will ensure that you have an agreement on both sides. That's one of the most important cues in closing that whole communication cycle, is making sure that you've restated the purpose and the outcome. I'm going to give you the 9 qualities in a different list format. Don't bother writing these down as we go. You'll be able to capture everything on the final screen. The first thing is deciding whether or not you really like to listen. Is all of that verbiage just wah, 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 wah? Or do you really want to be known as someone who's a good listener? If you decide you want to be a good listener, try to eliminate distractions. Get rid of the clutter on your desk, turn off the extraneous noises in the background. Make sure you have good lighting and a good location for your listening skills. As you're having a conversation with someone, summarize key points. If it's something quick, you just do one summary at the end. If it's more detailed, if it's a longer project that you're trying to get to or a longer meeting, you may have to summarize throughout the conversation. Try to tame your emotions. Try to avoid potential flagrant words like ignorant, like I did, but try to tame your emotions and your instant judgments and really just listen. If someone tells you that you're not a good listener right up front, don't react. Try to prove them wrong. Try to eliminate hasty judgments. Don't instantly decide, we tried that 8 years ago and it didn't work. Don't instantly decide that this person who's coming to make this proposal to you, you just don't like their suit or their haircut or their tattoos or whatever. Try to listen beyond what you see. Don't interrupt. Here's a test for you. Try giving someone 3 to 5 seconds to stop talking, to make sure that they're not just trying to gather their thoughts, that they're really done with what they want to say. 3 seconds can be a long time. Let me give you 3 seconds. That's a long time for dead air, right? So try giving people enough time to really stop before you start responding. Inspire openness. Say, may I take notes while you're talking? Or if it's your family member, turn off the music, turn off the TV. Let them know that you're fully engaged and prepared to listen to only them. If it's your boss, close down your email, clear off the papers in front of you. Decide if you really need to listen in this situation. If it's your kid saying, hey, Dad, I'm going out for practice, wave and say goodbye. If your wife's saying, honey, I'm going to the grocery store, wave and say goodbye. If your boss is standing there next to your desk, you better stop and decide that it's time to listen. And then as you've had your discussion, restate what you've come to an agreement on and make sure that you've both come to the same conclusions. These 9 items, if you follow each of these things, will help you to become a better listener. If you have questions about anything that we've said today, refer to the word listening, because these 9 items, if you take the first letter of each of these 9 things, will spell the word listening, and you'll know that you're doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bettie Covington. If you have questions or comments about any of the things that we've discussed today, send me an email. Put listening as the title to your email so I don't bomb it off, and I'll be happy to respond to you. I love to engage in the whole listening concept with people. So if you have questions or comments about this program, please feel free to engage with me. It's been a pleasure to work with you today, and I hope that you have found benefit here. Have a wonderful rest of the day.